Some people only show their true colors when you need them the most. And sometimes the real diagnosis doesn't come from a blood test. It comes from a text message. Picture this. You walk out of the doctor's office with the news that you have cancer. Your head spins, the ground disappears. But before you can even process it, you get home and find out you've been betrayed. Not by a stranger, not by an enemy, but by the one who claimed to love you and, without a second thought, left you in the darkest moment of your life. Now pay attention. She didn't leave you like that. She emptied out your bank account, disappeared with almost $300,000, and even tried to take it all to court. Can you believe that? Because I had a hard time believing it too. But that's exactly what happened to Ethan. And you know what's even crazier? He won, but not in the way you'd think. He didn't scream, didn't go after revenge, didn't fall into the trap of rage. He used the one weapon most people forget they have: emotional intelligence paired with legal strategy. This story is going to make you question who's really standing by your side. It'll teach you to spot hidden signs in everyday behavior. It'll show you that sometimes silence speaks louder than any speech. And what looked like a tragedy turned into the most powerful turning point anyone can live through. So if you've ever been betrayed, undervalued, or hit rock bottom in life, hold on tight. Because this story isn't just about pain. It's about how someone who lost everything still managed to rise above it all. And more than that, by the end of this video, you'll understand how to turn pain into a tool, trauma into fuel, and how to protect your emotions and assets from people who only love you when it's convenient. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize you're stronger than you think. But for that to happen, you have to stick around till the end. Because what comes next will change the way you see betrayal, and maybe even the way you see love. Some moments in life feel like badly written scripts. Those ones that make you stop and think, this has to be a joke. That's exactly how it felt for Ethan. An honest mechanic, 32 years in the business, who always chose wrenches over gossip, diagnoses over doubts. He left the doctor's office with a punch to the gut, stage 2 lymphoma. And just when he thought the worst already had a name and a face, something even crueler hit him. A text from his wife. I didn't sign up for this. Along with that cold sentence, the joint bank account wiped clean. The thing about pain is, it rarely shows up alone. Ethan didn't even have time to understand what the doctor was saying about lymphocytes or chemotherapy protocols. All he could think about was the image of Lauren speeding out of the garage and the bank alert that came minutes later. This wasn't just abandonment. It was calculated. And worse than that, it was betrayal at the exact moment he needed someone the most. The cancer might have been treatable, but that kind of break, now that's a wound that takes much longer to heal. The truth, one most people avoid, is that some folks only love you when it's easy. Lauren didn't leave because she couldn't bear to see him sick. She left because his illness got in the way of her plans. That's the kind of cancer nobody catches in time. Ambition disguised as companionship. And here's the tough but clear lesson. Character is revealed in the gray days, not the sunny ones. If you really want to know who you married, watch how they act when everything falls apart. Ethan could have snapped, fallen apart, or lashed out. But he didn't. He took a deep breath and did what any smart man does when the ground disappears. He looked for the next step, with strategy. When you're betrayed at your lowest, the answer isn't to scream, it's to plan. And here begins a major turning point that not many people talk about. Instead of chasing answers, he chased protection. Emotional protection, sure, but also legal and financial. Because there's a secret no one talks about when pain hits like a tidal wave. Those who act with reason beat those who act with rage. And Ethan knew that. He didn't want some movie-style justice. He wanted real justice. The kind built with evidence, strategy, and a cold head. The cancer would be handled with chemo. But Lauren? Oh, she'd be handled with intelligence. And that's when he took his first step toward the comeback. In moments of despair, some people run to church, others to the bar. Ethan went straight to Uncle Frank's house. A man of few words, but when he speaks, it's worth listening. A retired estate planner with decades of experience handling divorces, inheritances, and legal traps, Frank didn't ask how Ethan was doing. He just said, "Sit down. Let's protect what's yours." And so, on a quiet afternoon, one of the smartest moves anyone could make in the face of a silent betrayal began to unfold. While most people try to patch up their emotions first, Ethan decided to shield what was tangible. He and Frank reviewed every document, every account, every asset shared with Lauren, from the car insurance to the house deed. That's where the difference lies between survivors and strategists. Those who think long-term act with precision in the present. Lauren had run off with money, but she had left traces. And with each signature reviewed and each clause analyzed, Ethan was regaining not just financial control, but control of his own story. One thing most people don't realize is that emotional abandonment often comes with financial abandonment. Lauren didn't walk away empty-handed. She had a plan, and like most rushed plans, it had holes. Ethan and Frank spotted suspicious transactions, changes in shared account passwords, authorizations he never gave. To the average person, it might have looked like paranoia, but to someone who knows the game, it was clear evidence. And that's when they made a decision. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a financial attack. At this point, what Ethan was building was more than just a defense, it was a legal armor. If you've ever gone through something similar, you know what I mean. It's not about revenge, it's about making sure the person who hurt you doesn't keep draining you long after they've gone. And don't be fooled, this happens more often than you think. That's why speaking to someone who understands asset protection, a family lawyer or a financial planner, can be the first real step to getting out of the mud with dignity and intelligence. And while Frank handled the paperwork, Ethan began gathering more than just documents. He started connecting the dots. Because here's the thing. Betrayals rarely begin on the day someone walks out. Most of the time, the signs are scattered long before, in small actions, in cold glances, in poorly made excuses. Now calmer, Ethan started mentally revisiting the past, with the clarity of someone finally understanding where everything started to fall apart. Sometimes the truth doesn't strike like lightning. It creeps in like a constant drizzle you ignore, until you realize you're soaked. As Ethan calmly replayed memories, he began to see that his marriage with Lauren had already been bleeding long before the diagnosis. There was something about her smiles. They never lasted more than 2 seconds. At dinner, silence wasn't peace. It was distance. And when he talked about simple dreams like fixing up the Chevrolet Impala, she changed the subject. Like that life just wasn't enough anymore. Lauren was always in a rush for recognition, for luxury, for status. She never understood why Ethan didn't trade the garage for a real job. One time during a dinner with her friends, she laughed when he said he liked the smell of grease. "You should launch a car startup, not run some old garage," she said. It sounds silly, but it's in offhand comments like that where contempt reveals itself. Ethan remembered that moment with the pain of someone who realizes they were slowly belittled, as if his soul had been sanded down in silence. It's not like she was cruel all the time. Lauren knew how to play the image game. She knew how to smile at neighbors, post happy couple photos on Instagram, use his last name when it gave her clout. But deep down, she was already on another path, one that didn't include Ethan or cancer or real commitments. And it became even clearer when he remembered how often she refused to go to routine checkups with him. "Too busy with work," she'd say. But there was always time for the gym, happy hours, or those last-minute just the girls trips. A lot of people ignore these signs because it hurts too much to face what's right in front of them. But if there's one thing Ethan learned, it's that real love doesn't make you feel like you're not enough just by being yourself. If the person next to you needs you to completely change in order to stay, maybe they were never truly with you, just with the version of you they projected. And honestly, that's more common than it seems. There are lots of people in relationships based on emotional contracts that were never discussed, just assumed. And it was in this exercise of looking back with sharper eyes that Ethan became sure. Lauren didn't just drift away. She prepared for it. Because anyone who betrays with that level of financial precision had already mentally left a long time ago. And with that clarity, he realized that understanding wasn't enough. It was time to act. If pain had opened his eyes, his next steps needed to be solid. So he started gathering more than just memories. He started gathering evidence. When pain gives way to clarity, that's when the real turning point begins. Ethan knew it wasn't enough to be right. He had to prove it. And like any good strategist, he started gathering what most people overlook: digital footprints, emails, bank statements, screenshots of conversations. Every suspicious transaction became part of a dossier he organized with the precision of an accountant. Numbers don't lie. Lauren had transferred over $280,000 to unknown accounts, most of them linked to names on her side of the family. But the biggest twist came from where he least expected: his cousin Emily. Young, sharp, and quick to spot fake behavior, she had always found Lauren's actions suspicious. One day, Emily happened to come across a conversation between Lauren and a friend, where she openly talked about hiding money and securing her future away from that sick mechanic. That screenshot landed in Ethan's hands like a lit stick of dynamite. Because it's one thing to suspect. It's something else entirely to have time-stamped, detailed proof. If there's anything stories like this teach us, it's that the truth can be delayed, but it can't be buried. With the help of a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud, Ethan organized all the documents. Together they built a detailed timeline of the withdrawals, the unauthorized transactions, and the misuse of marital funds. It was more than a defense. It was a clear, well-documented narrative that couldn't be refuted. And in court, that's worth more than 1,000 emotional speeches. Very few people are prepared for this kind of war. But Ethan understood that love requires trust and breakups require strategy. There's no use clinging to memories of what was if. What stands in front of you is a well-planned attempt to leave you broke and broken. What he did, anyone can do. Gather documents, organize the evidence in chronological order, seek legal counsel. There's nothing wrong with protecting yourself. What's wrong is letting pain turn into ruin because you didn't act in time. And while the legal team organized the paperwork and built the timeline of betrayal, Ethan was preparing for something even bigger. Because if there's one thing Lauren never expected, it was that he'd get back up so quickly. And now, with the evidence in hand and the truth on his side, he had the most powerful weapon against any manipulation: the facts. But the war was far from over. Lauren was about to make her move. Anyone who thinks court is about who tells the best story is mistaken. What really counts is who brings the strongest facts, and Ethan knew that. That's why, with his legal team by his side, he didn't just prepare to defend himself. He prepared to dismantle the narrative Lauren was building. Because yes, she came back into the picture, all smiles and with a rehearsed speech. She claimed she'd been emotionally betrayed, that she only took what was rightfully hers, and that she deserved half of everything. She just forgot to run that story past the bank statements and screenshots. Ethan's team, however, was one step ahead. They tracked down transfers made to accounts in Lauren's parents' names, disguised as family loans. Here's the kicker. Those same parents who had claimed to know nothing were receiving monthly deposits that matched the withdrawals from the joint account. In a tense hearing, the judge asked Lauren about those deposits. She stuttered. The truth is, when lies run into logic, they trip hard. And right there in front of everyone, she tripped. Badly. Ethan didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't make a scene. Because he knew real victories aren't loud. They're solid. While Lauren relied on emotion and manipulation, he brought structure and calm. That's one of the biggest takeaways from this whole ordeal. When someone tries to destroy you with stories, respond with evidence. When they paint you as the villain, show the numbers, the statements, the messages. In the end, the judge doesn't care about tears. They care about facts that hold up after the makeup comes off. A well-built legal strategy is like a chess trap. You let the other side move freely until they box themselves in. And that's exactly what happened. Lauren tried to flip the game, twist the past, manipulate everyone's perception. But she forgot that against a well-prepared man, lies aren't a shield. They're a trap. And now she was caught in her own, surrounded by documents she'd signed herself. But even with this major turning point, Ethan was still carrying a huge weight: the illness. While dealing with court dates, deadlines, and legal rebuttals, he was also undergoing chemotherapy. And here's what no one saw coming. What was supposed to be his weakness became his strength. Because in the middle of all that vulnerability, he discovered something powerful: the ability to turn pain into purpose. And that began to change not only the case, but his entire life. It's strange how life's worst moments reveal the most authentic parts of who we are. Ethan, juggling chemo sessions and court hearings, could have easily broken down. But he didn't. He found strength in the most unexpected places. A note from the neighbor left in the mailbox, a homemade meal from his sister, a silly joke from his nephew. Small gestures that piece by piece built an invisible but solid support system. That's how healing begins. One day at a time, one kind act at a time. Pain forced him to slow down, and for the first time in years, Ethan had space to look inward. He started writing down his thoughts in an old notebook, Frank's gift, scribbling out fears he never had the courage to face before. Fear of death, the sting of betrayal, bottled up anger. It all poured out onto those pages, and like any man who learns to name what he feels, he began to reclaim control. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in admitting you're not okay, and that's not weakness, it's raw courage. Even with a tired body, Ethan's mind became sharper. He started consuming content that fed his soul, books like The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, videos about resilience, even a few podcasts on emotional minimalism. He learned that sometimes, less really is more. That simplifying doesn't mean giving up, it means focusing on what matters. And with that new rhythm, he rediscovered old joys, brewing his own coffee, tending to the front yard, slowly restoring his beloved Chevrolet Impala. And the most beautiful part? This new version of Ethan wasn't born from pride over winning a legal battle, but from the humility of surviving an internal one. The illness that once seemed like an end became a new beginning, and the loneliness that used to feel unbearable became a companion, because he realized he was never truly alone. What he lacked was silence, the kind that lets you hear your own voice, without the noise of everyone else's expectations. And in that stillness, he was reborn. People often asked if he'd ever love again, and Ethan would just smile, without rush, because at that moment he wasn't even thinking about that. His focus was on something bigger, living with authenticity, living on his terms, without performing for anyone. And even though chemo had left its marks on his body, you could see the biggest change in his eyes. Peace. The kind of peace that only comes to those who, even bruised, have learned to walk steady. And little did he know what was still to come. True victories don't come with fireworks. They arrive in silence, with the weight of a relieved breath. That's how it felt the day Lauren's lawyer walked into the courtroom and, pale as paper, offered a settlement. The tide had turned. The evidence was undeniable, a series of bank transfers, incriminating messages, solid witness statements, and inconsistencies all over her story. Lauren finally realized that dragging things out would only make it worse. And Ethan? He kept the same calm he had practiced from the start. The agreement was clear and straightforward. She would return all $280,000 she had received and would forfeit any rights to the house, car, and other assets. No appeals, no more drama. Lauren agreed. Not out of remorse, but out of calculation, just like everything else she did. What she didn't realize was that the moment she walked out of that courtroom, she also walked out of control of the story. Because for the first time, Ethan wasn't just the victim. He was the author, the owner of his own narrative. And that, right there, is worth more than any dollar amount. When you win with dignity, justice tastes different. Ethan didn't shout, didn't rub his victory in anyone's face. He simply shook his lawyer's hand, thanked the judge, and walked out of the courthouse with the quiet confidence of someone who hadn't just defeated another person, but had conquered himself. Because in the end, the biggest battle was inside. It was against anger, the urge for revenge, the temptation to fight fire with fire. And that's where true power lies, in not becoming what broke you. That win became a wake-up call for everyone around him. Friends who once told him just let it go, now looked at him with quiet respect. Neighbors whispered about how he'd handled it all with class. Even Uncle Frank, a man of few words, muttered a "proud of you, kid," that echoed in Ethan's mind for days. Sometimes winning is also about teaching. It's about showing that you can face injustice without losing your soul along the way. But once everything was settled, the silence came. And it's in that silence, after the battle, that many people collapse. But Ethan had other plans. Now that the legal war was over and the cancer was finally showing signs of retreat, he felt something stirring inside him. A real desire to start over, far from the city, far from the old scenes, far from everything that reminded him of pain. It was time to turn the page, and he knew exactly where to begin. Starting over for Ethan didn't mean erasing the past. It meant giving it a new meaning. After closing the final legal chapter and hearing the news that his lymphoma was in remission, he did what many would call crazy. He sold the house in Boise, donated what he didn't need, and headed for the Montana countryside. He bought a modest cabin, surrounded by pine trees and with a peaceful lake view. No luxury, no status, just silence, nature, and peace. Something he hadn't felt in years. His routine changed completely. He woke up with the sun on his face, made strong coffee, and went back to working on his old Chevrolet Impala. Not out of urgency, but for the joy of it. Fixing that car became almost therapeutic. Every bolt he tightened was like a thought falling back into place. And if he once fixed cars to pay bills, now he did it to reconnect with who he really was. He realized he didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The only approval that mattered was his own. In the new town, few people knew his story, and that was freeing. He could just be Ethan, the guy who ran the shop by the lake. No labels, no pity, no ghosts lurking around. He got involved with the local community, helped neighbors with repairs, hosted small gatherings in the evenings. Slowly, that place stopped being just a retreat and became home. And that's rare, to find a place where you can be whole, without having to explain yourself all the time. Curiously, it was in this new setting that he also found his faith again. Not necessarily in religion, but in cycles. In the belief that everything has its time, its reason, its hidden lesson. Sometimes he'd spend hours reading by the lake or just watching the clouds shift shape. And in that silence, gratitude would rise. Not for the pain he'd endured, but for surviving it with dignity. And for knowing that, even broken, he'd rebuilt himself stronger. But life, even when it seems settled, still likes to test us. One day, a notification on his phone broke the calm. A message from Lauren. A long text, full of nostalgia, apologies, and vague lines. She had found out he was doing well, that the cancer had been beaten, that he'd moved on. But what she didn't know was that the version of Ethan she remembered no longer existed. The phone rang at 22 hours and 17 minutes. The number was familiar, but long forgotten. Lauren. The message wasn't short. It began with, "Hey, Ethan," and spilled into carefully chosen phrases. Memories of their marriage, praise for his strength, half-hearted regrets, an unspoken invitation to reconnect. But Ethan wasn't the man who once begged for scraps of affection. He read it all, calmly, without anger, without any rush to respond. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and smiled to himself. Because for the first time, he knew exactly what to do. The next morning, he replied with just 12 words. "I survived. Take care." And then he blocked the contact. No dramatic final statement, no speech, no resentment. Because Ethan had learned something that changes lives. Forgiveness doesn't require continued contact, and closure doesn't need fireworks. Sometimes the most powerful ending is the one that doesn't need to be explained, only lived. He didn't need Lauren to admit guilt. He just needed to release himself from carrying a story that no longer belonged to him. The days that followed felt light, not because life was perfect, but because he'd stopped fighting internal wars. He no longer felt the need to prove anything. Not to her, not to anyone. If life were a book, Ethan had closed the chapter with confidence and wasn't afraid to turn the page. What Lauren had done, what she'd tried, what she said she felt, none of it mattered anymore. Because he no longer lived in that version of the story. He lived in the now, and the now was fully his. Some people wait for apologies that never come. Others wait for second chances that would only bring more pain. Ethan learned that you don't need a return to validate your healing. He closed the door with respect, not bitterness. He moved on without looking back, like someone who understands that real life begins the moment you stop clinging to what should have been and embrace what can be. That's not coldness, that's maturity. And maturity, my friend, hurts, but it sets you free. And while Lauren's final message vanished into the black hole of blocked contacts, Ethan climbed a trail through the Montana mountains, with the Impala parked in the distance and the sky glowing orange above. A new chapter was unfolding, quietly, because finally, he understood. Not every new beginning needs an audience. Sometimes all it takes is a man, a horizon, and the certainty that he'll never be the same again. And now tell me, how many times have you ignored the signs just to avoid losing someone? How many times have you silenced your own intuition just to keep up the appearance of happiness that no longer existed? The truth is, a lot of people are living in the ruins of relationships, but they only realize it after they've been drained emotionally, psychologically, and financially. And the lesson Ethan leaves us with is clear. You might be betrayed, but staying broken is a choice. Maybe you're not battling cancer today, but what about toxic relationships? That job that's draining you? The promises that are never kept? Could it be that you also need to do what Ethan did and flip the switch once and for all? Because here's one thing I guarantee. When used right, pain can become the best teacher of your life. You just have to decide you won't be the ladder people use to climb while stepping on you. Now tell me in the comments, what was the turning point in your life? Have you ever been through something like this? What would you do differently if you had the clarity you do now? Share it. Your story might help someone who's standing exactly where you once stood. And if this content made sense to you, touched a wound, or brought you an answer, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on notifications, and join us every week to learn how to flip the script on your life, using your head, your heart, and your courage. Because here, we don't romanticize betrayal. We turn it into growth. And that, my friend, is something no one can ever take from you.